Okay. Good afternoon. This is a meeting of the Board of Library Trustees. It is now 3:31, and we are meeting to interview candidates for the position of library director. With me are the other members of the Board of Trustees, Aidan Heffernan, our member at large, Heather Dennis, our trustee secretary. I am Joanne Geneva, the trustee chair. And we also have Erin Chinapi with us, who is the HR director for the town. And our first candidate that we will be interviewing this afternoon is Derek Wilson. Derek, we will begin by asking you to introduce yourself to the members of the board and to give us a brief description of your library experience and background, focusing on what you feel makes you a qualified candidate for this position.
Okay. Hi, I'm Derek. I've met some of you, of course, but not everybody. So hello again, and hello to everybody else. Yeah, I've been doing library stuff for about 10 years now. And I started all the way at the bottom and worked my way all the way up, moving through that process. My first job was as a clerk doing technical services in the town of Clinton. And they were a library who had just joined CWMRs, and they hadn't digitized their collection enough. None of their bibliographic stuff was like that. And so I was taking books and old cards. I gotta not hit that again, sorry. And putting them into the system for the first time so it was computer accessible so people could do the regular catalogings and circulation stuff you're used to now. They had just joined. They're one of the last libraries in Massachusetts to have done so. This was about 10 years ago now, so it's probably just about everybody but the really, really small Western Mass libraries. But yeah, they had one of the last card catalogs in function where they were still putting them out, and we converted that over. And that was my first job, getting to know how the library worked from the really basic ground of the last generation up to what we're gonna do now and moving forward. And I moved on from there to really small supervisory jobs, technical services positions that had staff under me doing the same thing but in a day-to-day sense for slightly larger libraries. I went to Drake it from there. And I was there for 2-ish years, and I did that for a while until I moved on to a larger library in Milford with a bigger staff and more responsibility. That was much bigger. Did the circulation department too and had 8 or 9 people, so it was a chance to really practice some management compared to Drake it, where I had 1.5 staff. I had 2 part-time people who almost made 50 hours. And in Milford it was 10 people. And I did that for a couple of years until I saw a position open up in Maynard, which was the assistant director's position. But the assistant director there managed the same departments, but just had the whole library and a lot more administrative stuff on top of it, budget stuff, big planning stuff, that kind of thing. That was an opportunity for me to see it from the top down, right? So it's been a slow and steady progression towards enhanced management with a focus on day-to-day library stuff as part of the background. I think it's a good transition to a library like yours. It's relatively small. We have a lot of responsibility that goes beyond just administration. At least that's what my thinking was when I applied for the job and came here. What I know so far seems to back that up, but that's why I think I'm a reasonable candidate for this position.
Okay. Do either of you have a follow-up question to that, or? All right, we can move on.
So as Joanne mentioned, I'm Heather Dennis, and I've been a library trustee for about 1.5 years and a library fan my entire life. My question for you is, what would your first day, week, month, and year look like as the director?
Okay, that's a good question, because I will start with the first one, most obvious one, which I'll be spending a lot of time learning everyone's names. I'm really bad at it, so I'm going to have to really focus on it. Even though it's not a big staff, it's still the kind of thing where you really have to particularly part-time people, if you don't see them every day, you really want to get to know everybody. Yep. And that'll extend all the way through it. First month, the same idea. You're going to want to be getting to know people, but you're going to want to be monitoring what they do now. First, you just want to get to know people on your first day, right? Just see how everything works. Don't make any waves. You don't want to make any waves for your first month either, but you want to know what everybody does too. You want to get a real sense for how they fit it in, what's going on, and how you've done things. And then let's say 6 months, You'll at that point have an idea of how things have been going, and you'll probably have a sense for how you might want to, the direction you're thinking about for the future, for what you might want to change and what you might want to keep. And over the course of a whole year, I imagine you'll have applied all of the stuff I just said, but to a wider audience in your whole town. At that point, you'll want to have gotten to know the people who use the library the most. You'll want to have met people in the other offices in town, people you're going to be interacting with for stuff, the selectmen, things like that. I don't know how much of that will come up day to day, but by the course of a year, I think you'll have had an opportunity to get to know everyone a little bit. And I think, particularly for a library in a relatively small town, that kind of networking is really one of your big priorities, because you're going to be working with these people, not all the time, but for important stuff when you do. So it's important to want to have that relationship so you can expect that to move forward. After about a year, I think that's when you're ready to outline your plan for what 5 years is going to look like. That's when you're ready to be like, okay, I think I know who's here. I think I know who the players are and who you're going to want to talk to about it. And I think we'll have a good idea, having worked together at that point, what everybody wants from the library. Mm-hmm. And then a reasonable idea of how to visualize how to get what we want, what we're going to have to do and what that's going to look like.
Thank you. Good.
Any follow-up questions?
If you'd like.
No,
follow
I'm
up.
good.
Okay, then we could go on to question 3.
My name's Aidan Heffernan. It's nice to meet you. I've
you too.
been on the library trustee for 5, going on 6 years. So how would you evaluate the priorities for the library relative to other services the town would like to offer and the public would like to have? How would you communicate these priorities to the town manager, select board, finance committee, and town meetings?
In general, this is a hard sell. Libraries are really important, but in a way that does not manifest itself the same way that people feel about police and fire and DPW. And those things are really important too. It's not meant to say that if you got rid of those and give all that money to the library, you'd have a better town. I think we know that those things all have a place, and everybody needs to balance that appropriately. So generally speaking, I think the problem is, or the thing that you really want to most focus on when you're talking about talking about the priorities and how that matters and what services you provide, is maintaining the appropriate balance. You don't want people to forget that the library exists or assume that it will function with no resources and that it will be getting the value you want for it without doing any of that stuff. Because the town suffers for it, it's just less immediately obvious. Over a long period of time, people have less good feelings about your town, and this is provable, but harder to demonstrate, and will be a thing that I'll probably do with the financial committee at some point. Your real estate values suffer, and your tax income suffers over the course of the value of your library. Libraries are a feel-good investment. That matters a lot for a town and people who want to live there and the services they want for it. They want things that they're going to enjoy, that they like. They like safety, and they like roads, and they care about these things too. But libraries make people smile. Nobody ever smiles at the guy who takes their trash away. They need him to do it, but they care about the library. A beautiful library is a selling point for people. I have refused to buy an apartment in a town because the library was bad and had a bad reputation. It's the sort of thing people think about, and it matters in the long term, but it's subtle. It's ground level stuff that you don't think about a lot. You have to have somebody bring it up to you, which is what I think I would try to do when it comes time to talk about it with financial committees and selectmen. Libraries provide a lot of services, and it can be hard to say, particularly for a library like yours that's very small, that can't provide some of the services that bigger libraries provide. You're not even aware how much your particular municipality might need those services because they're not getting them, so there isn't people coming up and going, man, I really need more meeting space. They probably do, but who are they going to tell? Some of this is projecting into the future. Collection development is this way. You don't know that people are going to need a new thing, but you have to make that leap of faith a little bit to go, well, we don't have any data on it because we don't have it, right? It's not here for me to tell you how much people use it because I can't get it to let them use it. But some stuff is pretty self-evident, and other libraries make great examples. So usually if I'm going to talk about the value of a library, I will demonstrate the value of how something has worked in another place. There's a lot of networking that goes on with library organizations. People in CW Mars meet all the time. This is true of the whole state and every individual consortium. And there's a lot of resources out there if you want to do comparative studies for it. This is what I would like to do. This is how it's worked in other places. This is how I can give that to you. Priorities-wise, this is a sad truth, but libraries are often last in line for that kind of thing. And knowing that means you can't really bucket so much. It's hard to tell people you have to go to the front of the line. They're just never going to put that sort of priority on the value on a library, even with a really good pitch. But you can convince people to recognize the value of a library and stop ignoring them. Being at the back of a line doesn't mean you're not in line. At some point you have to queue up and expect that there will be some like stuff to go out, right? Like, I wouldn't be surprised to say that a town would want to build a police station before a library. But my assumption at that point would that be eventually they are going to build the library. That's a matter of time and priorities and working through it. Thank you so much. So I think what's most important is not letting people lose focus on the fact that at some point they're going to have to like pay the attention to the library. People can forget that in fact you've been passed over in the past and that other things have taken priority like over it. You need to remind them that at some point the attention must be paid. It's only a matter of time. And as far as the rest of it goes, as much data as you can get. You have to say these things to people in their idiom, right? If you want to talk to a financial committee about the value of a library, you talk to them about raised real estate taxes, the eventuality of like property values going up and what that means for their overall allocation every year. Increased population and stuff because of the value of services like this. Things like that eventually penetrate if you can prove it with numbers. That's the language you want to speak to a financial committee comparatively. I think selectmen work better with an emotional appeal about the value of the library to the town and what you aren't giving to people and what you think people need based on what you're doing. And then I think for the town itself, it's just a question of getting people to understand the larger picture about libraries, that there's more to them than books. There's a pervading sort of sense that libraries are for very specific people in a community. It's not true. There's something for everybody, or at least there can be, if you have the resources to provide all of the stuff that's becoming more common.
Thank you, Derek.
Thank you very much.
Follow-ups to that? Or are we all set? All right, so in following up on that question with our next question, can you give us some examples of how you would advertise and promote the library and its various programs and holdings to the community?
I've been thinking about this a lot. Since my first interview, I've done a little bit of research about how you would want to approach it. And I've talked about this at length with my wife. She works for a nonprofit, and they just recently did a large capital campaign. And she was talking about how to, like, find the important community centers in, like, a location and get to know the people who have clout and how to reach out to those groups and, like, make them aware of what you're doing and why they might be interested, because there's probably existing synergy. Like, there are people who care about the library but don't know that the library is there offering services that they want. And how to find it can be challenging. Some of the generic ideas are basic stuff that you do with other nonprofits. You get, like, you find donor lists for other nonprofits in your area. If you have like a YMCA, you find out who donates to it and go, you know, you guys care about civic things like this. We should talk to these people and see what they think. But broader community stuff, you want to find other related areas in your community. I think schools are a classic. We don't have a huge, like, available space for children's programming and stuff, but I think you could still reach out to people in schools and make sure library cards are being distributed there and get children interested. One of the classic, like, library techniques is that you make sure all of your displays are right near your children's stuff so that when parents bring their kids in, they have to walk past it on their way out and see things that might appeal to them. That's, like, your biggest one. You guys probably have a council on aging. You probably want to talk to them about a newsletter that you can, like, do cross-pollination for so that everybody who listens to that can also see what's going on at the library. It's a little bit stereotypical to say that retirees are big library users, but a lot of them do have the time and the interest, so it's a good place to start. There's no magic bullet for people between 25 and 45. I mean, every librarian in the world would be very excited to have a perfect way to reach out to those groups. And I think one of our big challenges now is that a lot of the traditional advertising stuff you would do, in-person stuff, physical stuff, things like that, doesn't have a lot of impact anymore. A lot of stuff is done online, where a lot of that's filtered out through the same sorts of things where everybody's screaming really loud. It's hard to find space. So you're still mostly relying on word of mouth through community outreach. And that's pretty hard. It takes a while to identify the best places to do it. But You guys are pretty close to the city. There's a lot of stuff there that you can reach out to. You could probably ask their library about a little cross-pollination from places where people do that. You guys, I can't say this for certain, but my suspicion is that you have a lot of people who must use that library there when they find the services here lacking. And you might want to redirect those people to go, we can assure you your local library is providing the service that you might or might not need. You want to get stuff out of the library, so you probably want to try events that are outside of the library that will attract attention, things like that. There are a couple of ideas for how best to do that. Normally I would try to bring people into the library, but with space being as limited as it is and current social distancing stuff making a lot of that unattractive, you'll probably want to be thinking about like outdoor things you can do in the summer that will attract people's attention to what the library can be. We've had good luck with concerts at some places. You're pretty close to the Common. If it's, I don't know what like permitting is like here, but it's a reasonable place to try to do things like that. Ballpark ideas. A lot of it you have to tailor to a specific place as you get to know the community, which is what you would want to do for your first year and really figure out who you want to target in the future. But
All right, thank you. All right,
Okay.
I'm good. Thank you.
The next question is, how would you describe your management style?
I like to trust employees. Generally speaking, and again, this is a little silly because in the past I've employed a lot of teenagers. I like to treat people like they're adults and assume that you can have a discussion with them about what your expectations are and what you would like them to do, and then trust them to be able to carry those out and then be available to help them if they have any problems with it. This is pretty straightforward for your typical stuff. A lot of people's ultimate day-to-day stuff is pretty straightforward, and you should be able to straighten that out pretty well. The harder part about management is getting people to offer up the good ideas they probably have. There are always people who have ideas for how to engage with this stuff, but they might not have the perspective on how best to do it. So you want to get that information from them and take their ideas and transform them into things that you guys can reliably do. I've worked with a lot of people who were very excited and very hardworking, who would have done 90-hour weeks if you let them, and you had to scale them back from that kind of, how much volunteering can I do? Can I just stay here for 8 hours after my shift's over? And you're like, stop. This idea is great. We can't do all of the things that you want to do. We have to do less of it. We have to accomplish the goal that you want with less. And it's really hard to channel that. So as far as management goes, it's important to keep people's enthusiasm, but also to temper it to something that is reliable. Resources are always limited at a library. Every library I've ever worked at, no matter how big or how much money it had, always had a finite amount of staff time, money, space. All of these things were always a problem. And you always have to try to take people's best ideas and make do with them without losing the thread of it. So as far as management goes, keeping that balance, right, between people's enthusiasm and what you can actually accomplish and getting it out of people. Not everyone's going to offer up their brilliant idea to you because they're going to assume that there isn't enough resources available. You want them to be enthusiastic and forward with it. And at the same time, you need them to be restrained enough that you can actually achieve it. Striking the right note with people is hard. So you really want to solicit those ideas, and you really want to channel them in a way that makes people happy. Because the biggest resource at a library is the staff. Literally, the definition of a library in this state is the presence of a librarian. That's what determines it. Everything else is secondary. You could open one in your basement if you had a library certificate and you were willing to do public lending. I looked it up once. It's amazing.
Good, thank you.
If you overheard one of your staff members giving misinformation to a patron, how would you address it?
I would probably let it go in the moment. It's not good to stop in and go, hey, unless you think it's really dangerous information, in which case you might then be like, all right, I think we've made a small mistake here. But it would depend a lot. If it was a mistake, you would just correct them. You would take a moment when it was private to just be like, hey, you made a small mistake there. That wasn't the right thing to, you didn't do that the correct way. That isn't the right information. There's a better way to do it, and you would share it with them. If you think it was deliberate, you would have a talk with them about appropriate standards and what sort of stuff you should offer people at the library. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that that's always going to be a mistake. that nobody seeks to mislead people as part of their library's training. That would be extremely unlikely. And the sort of thing that you would probably want to pursue as disciplinary if you thought somebody had like malicious intent towards patrons. I think that would be your next step there. But yeah, if it is relatively harmless and it isn't going to do anything that you're really worried about for a patron, I would probably take a moment once it was ready to do it privately and just talk to them about it and give them some instruction. If I thought it was more important that there was something that the patron couldn't get and wasn't going to be like really disappointed about because they were just making a mistake there, I might step in and go, I have another idea we might be able to try, and just sort of do that without making the staff member look like they were incompetent or anything like that. You don't want them to feel you want to take everyone's feelings into account, but you also want the patron to get whatever information they were looking to get for sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with long-range planning or strategic planning?
So, yes. A lot of it is already, whenever I've come into a library and we were going to talk about future stuff, a lot of it is building on what's already there. So a lot of 5-year plan alterations are you take the existing 5-year plan and go, how much of this did we achieve? How much of it worked? What do we want to add to it? And what do we want to take away from it for the next one? They tend to be living documents that you prune, is really my experience with them so far. That isn't always a bad thing, but so I guess I've never drafted one whole cloth. It's always been sort of like, here's what I think we would like to do this year. How does that fit in with our existing 5-year plan? What did we do in the last 5 years and what's still in here and what do we want to change and how do we make this work for what people's ideas are? So it's really been, we came to it with existing ideas for what new things we were going to try or what new properties we were going to engage with. And then we would update the plan to reflect that, to be like, well, what can we include in this and what can we not, and what's part of what's already here. It's also a pretty good check for it, because if you had an idea and the 5-year plan included something about it, and you had just finished it, you could just go, oh, well, we already tried that, That was part of past efforts that didn't really pan out, so if we want to revisit it, we're going to have to try it in a different way or from a new perspective. So yeah, a lot of it is that way. A lot of them are existing. You take the last 5-year plan and go, all right, what's in here that we're going to keep because we probably didn't achieve all of these? They're always more aspirational than practical. You go, here's what we'd like to do. How much of it got done? How much of it didn't? And then how much of it do we want to continue in moving forward with? And what are we going to do about that? And then what new stuff do we want to add to it to make sure that the next 5 years include whatever things have changed, right? Not always the case, but in 5 years, you've often have at least one new staff member, at least a couple of new ideas for services or experiences that have changed. I think 5-year plans are going to be really different after COVID. I think a lot of people made 5-year plans without anticipating 2 years of partial closures and all kinds of other stuff and are going to be looking at them with how much of that did we achieve and how much do we need to throw out to worry about all the changes that we made? And do we want to scale these back, or what's that going to look like? Or what new services did we offer that we want to keep, and how many of them are practical to keep? I know some places are probably going to do curbside forever. They liked it so much, and some people switched to home delivery that really took off and probably want to keep it. Some people want to forget the whole thing ever happened and are never going to do it again, but it's still going to be reflected in the next set of 5-year plans. So experience to date, in Maynard, we included the grant writing stuff for last year. 5-ish years ago, we looked back at the, 3-ish years ago, we looked back at the existing plan and said, what's already in here? What are we trying to address? What are our big goals? And then when it came time to do grant writing season, people had that in mind for what sort of grants they wanted to apply for and what sort of things they were going to do and what they were aiming towards. This is required by the grant writing process, of course. They want you to see your 5-year plan and how this relates to it. But it's also just good, processing, right? What projects do you want to work on this year? And what does the 5-year plan say about those projects? How do they fit together? Is good internally as well as externally. That's the majority of it, though. We really only updated it then. They had just finished it when I started there, and we did some updates to reflect the grant writing that we wanted to do over the course of the time that I was there. But it was, like I said, we very rarely sat down at the end of 5 years and went, it's time to grab a whole new one. Every year we would update it a little bit based on what we were doing and kept it fresh that way.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so we have a few more questions for you. This is my final question, though. What would you do to generate support for a building project in the community and with the various town boards and offices. So what would you do to generate support for a building project?
I've thought about this a little bit, and it would depend on a lot of factors. But I think at this point, the first thing I would want to do is figure out exactly why the last one didn't work. There was obviously some pushback. I had a friend who was local around the same time who said you even had like lawn signs that were like, vote no on the library. Why? What about the library was antagonistic to people in such a way that you would need support? That's a good thing to identify first anyways. And then back to my original question about like getting to know people. That's part of the same thing. You'd spend a year getting to know people without really pushing an agenda yet, because you just want to see who's receptive to that kind of idea and what their feelings about those sorts of things are and like how that kind of thing is. And then once you've identified people who you think you can work with, you should probably start talking about what their plans are and how you can make those work together. I mean, your financial committee obviously has an agenda for buildings, right? That's probably something they consider, like how often they want to do stuff and what those are going to be and in what order. And you can probably talk to them about it, and you can probably talk to the people who are the recipients of that theoretical plan and how they feel about it. I imagine you guys in the fire department are in an unusual position where, like, you share a building almost. So they probably are looking to have a new building built, would be my assumption. I don't know that for sure, but anyone who's in town hall wants to not be in town hall except town hall. That's just small town thinking, sorry. Like, we gradually did that in my hometown, and it's pretty much true of everywhere. Things will always just grow until they don't fit anymore. So the question will become who should go first and how much that's going to cost and what's reasonable to achieve. In Maynard, about 15 years ago, my previous director there told me the story about how they got the library off the ground there. And I'll probably use him as a resource because he did this whole process and was great. But he essentially said that the reason they got the library compared to other town offices that wanted a new building is because the other town offices were so confident that they could have such extravagant buildings that they asked for something like $60 million for their specific process. And when they were talking at the library, they were like, well, we would like 10. And they went, yeah, great, you can have 10 because we won't give them 60. And that was like sort of the default there. But I feel like it's the kind of thing that with collaboration could probably be addressed. Like maybe you could work out with other places looking for building projects, like in what order they should go and how you could work that out, like with the people responsible. I mean, I'm sure the fire department has opinions, but maybe you could work with them directly to figure out who should go next and how to present that to the financial committee. I think it would be easier than like competing with them. I can't imagine competition is ever really valuable unless you have a lot of friends on these committees, and I don't know how long it will take to make friends like that would be willing to go along with it. So it's the kind of thing where you would want to build support quietly and like with people behind the scenes until everybody agrees that it's time. I think there's a couple of ways to do it, of course, by demonstrating the value of a library and all of the other stuff and giving them like a lot of information about the services you hope to provide and what sort of things that's going to be. And I think the more exact you can be about that, the more into it people will be. And I think you can build support for it gradually by being available, informed, and not too pushy. Might be a little different depending upon your town. Maybe being aggressive is the way to do it, maybe it's not. But you'll have to evaluate it as you get to know the people involved, for sure. Yeah, I think that's how I try to build support. Make friends, get to know people, talk about who wants things done and in what order, and see if there's some wiggle room for where to fit yourself into that process. There's somebody here, whether they know it or not, who has a big picture plan for how all of that's supposed to work, and I bet you could wiggle yourself around inside of it to get what you were looking for.
Thank you.
Okay. What is your experience with budget preparation, and what do you see the roles of your staff and the Board of Selectmen? I'm not the Board of Selectmen, this board, the library board, in that process.
In the past, I've mostly handled the collection department's budget for every library I've worked at. All of it has been like collection development and ordering and that sort of thing. Staff costs are usually relatively fixed, don't have a lot of flex to them. Might be a little different here. You have more part-time people and you're not specifically a union like run place. Right. So there's like a lot of that stuff is just set in stone at a lot of places, right? If you're going to hire a person, it must be at this rate for this job, for this sort of thing, and you can't. There isn't a lot of wiggle room in the staff budget for sure. But I've set them up, carried them out, kept them successfully inside of our spending caps for state requirements and for town requirements. Can I have the rest of the question? I feel like I'm missing a thread there.
Basically, it's just what is the involvement in setting up your budget that would include this board?
Yes.
As well as your staff. So how involved with setting up your budget would they be as well?
Excellent. Okay. Thank you. That was the part I was missing. Staff involvement is usually related to collection development, projects they want to work on, things that they're hoping to include, collections that they want to keep or remove. That usually is something you want to figure into the budget, even if you're going to be the one like giving the actual numbers for it. You want to take their ideas and turn those into numbers. That's usually like part of the process. I imagine the same thing is true of what you would want to do with the trustees. You guys probably have some big picture policy ideas that you want to work towards, and you want to talk about what the numbers for those are going to be based on what's available. Yeah, because if we were going to like hire new staff, or if somebody quits and we're not sure if we want to replace them or something like that, like that's a trustees talk for like how you guys want to proceed forward with a big picture process like that and what we should spend to do it. I know you guys get a reasonable sized state aid grant every year, and I presume that will continue. But I'm not sure exactly how you have to spend it. For some places, it's the sort of thing that gets consumed by collection development, which has to be done. And for some, it's not. It can be more free money for various projects and stuff. But I imagine that's a discussion you have with the trustees, too, exactly how to allocate that sort of budget and those sorts of things. That's what I'm at least looking forward to in, like, how I would be planning a budget. Usually I just take existing budgets and then like make small adjustments to them and then talk to people about what sorts of things that they wanted to change and then see how to do that without it being too over the top. Library budgets don't usually change in big ways for the better. So the assumption is that you don't have like a lot of big changes to make, but you might move stuff around, particularly in areas of development for collections, or if you were spending money on materials or projects that you might want to change. I occasionally have had good luck like shaving staff time down to free them up for projects by automating some stuff for the tech services stuff. Some of that can be done with a little bit of money, but it's a supply budget thing. It can cost a little more. That's the sort of thing you'd want to talk about and get like their buy-in on. I've had tech services people who really liked putting stickers on books and didn't want that to be automated by a computer. And it's the sort of thing where you go, well, you know, if this is really your preference and we're not going to spend the money on it, then so be it. It's better to do it than this way than make you upset and waste money, right, if you're not going to be happy with it. But at the same time, you'd probably want to talk to the trustees before you're like, great, I'm going to take 10 hours out of somebody's schedule and replace it with like some extra money we send to the book ordering companies we use. Those are all like processes I'd want people to talk to about for your budget changing and stuff like that. But usually I'm the one presenting these ideas in my experience so far. I'll be like, hey, I want to do this thing with the tech services budget. Let's talk about what we're going to do for the entire collection to do that. And that tends to be pretty friendly because of the nature of like spending requirements for Massachusetts libraries, because you have to spend so much money. It's really just a question of like keeping abreast of the rules for what constitutes spending that money correctly. Like one of the more recent changes that you guys might be familiar with now is that a lot of technology for patron use now counts as collection stuff. For a long time, you couldn't buy computers for patrons and then have that count, and now up to 10% of your budget can be spent that way, which has really freed up a lot of places to like keep modernizing computers that they have and like lend laptops and things, like all sorts of stuff that was just out of the question because it was money that you had to get from some outside source and now is available to be used from your municipal appropriation. So that sort of thing, keeping abreast of it's an important part of a budget planning process, no doubt.
Okay, follow-ups to that question? All set? All right, so if offered the position of library director, what would your top 3 priorities be and how would you determine them?
Determining them will take a little time. I can think of a few things right off the top of my head just from like the research I've already done on your library and what kind of stuff. But I mean, we'll say first day. Determining my priorities is going to be, the first priority is getting to know everybody, for sure. As much information as you can get your hands on for making decisions later and deciding what else needs to get done. I think second priority, once you've gotten to know that sort of stuff, is likely going to be putting together a 1-year, 5-year plan. Just like mapping it out once you know what's going on, how you want to address it. I feel like the challenges your library faces in like a theoretical building project are big multi-step projects. You're going to want to decide a lot of things, and like the order of operations for it is going to be more complicated than just, we should do a building project. I imagine it's going to be a long time like figuring out what to do and in what order, and how like you want to prioritize that versus how much time you want to spend building support and how you're going to do that and what those sorts of things look like. So first we get to know everybody. Then I think I'd want to focus on community outreach. Once you know what's happening and who the people are, you're going to want to find out who you're not serving and reach out to them and tell them what you can do for them and what you would like to do for them in the future and what you need to make that happen. And then I think once you've done that and you're starting to work on support, then it's time to decide what the best way to spend that theoretical support capital is, what your project is going to be, what a building project is going to look like, or what services you're going to want to expand. Yeah, first you figure out who everybody is, then you decide how you're going to move forward with it, and then you start instituting whatever those decisions are. So it ends with a 5-year plan, I think.
Okay. Now, we'll turn it over to you. Do you have any last questions or comments that you'd like to share with us?
I did this question last time, but we had less different people, so I'll try it again. I like
Which is
this
why
one.
I'm
Yeah.
putting it forward to you again.
A good opportunity. What are you guys looking for in a director that you did not get from your last director? What new thing do you want somebody to bring to this position?
Just off the top of my head, I mean, not necessarily even something that we didn't get from our last director, but what's important to me is, community outreach and going into the schools and into the Council of Aging that we have on Huff Road, and just anywhere, and making sure that we're grabbing as many people as we can and serving as many people as we can, which I know is hard because we do have, very limited space here. And I know we have used the common for different programs and stuff, and tried to do that as much as we can. And even some area businesses have allowed us to hold programs there, which has been very helpful and stuff. But I just feel like even like our Boy Scouts and our Girl Scouts, we could pull in for more programs for their badges and things like that. And I feel like we could really do more in that area.
Sure.
And expand in that area. Yeah.
Just to expand on that, we are a small town, but we are an active town. There's an awful lot going on. And I think the library could capitalize on a lot of the events that take place in town. We do a huge event the first week of December. We do hopefully again, a parade around the 4th of July. We have all kinds of community events that bring people together, and I think having the library be part of those events, to have a presence there, would make a huge difference in getting the library to be better known by the people of the community that don't use it, that don't take advantage of it right now. And in doing that, I think it would help to get the word out about the need for more community-friendly space in the library.
I agree. We need to coordinate more with some of the other activities that go on in town with other groups. For example, Halloween, the Historical Society had graveyard tours, but the library only had regular hours. We should have probably engaged with them a little and or helped support them, because we could have done something together, because the library's here and the graveyard tours behind the building. And I think, we could have done a lot together and made both groups much more successful.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, even I know we had started before COVID like a strawberry festival on the town, and it would have been great if the library had a booth there. maybe doing crafts, something like that, Strawberry Festival related crafts, free
Story
crafts.
times.
Yep, or even kindergarten registration at the school. There's usually 3 or 4 dates that every kindergartner has to come in for testing at the school. Maybe have a representative from the library there saying, let's give you everyone their first library card and sign you up for that. And also here's a list of the upcoming activities. Things like that, I think, would really expand our presence. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think that's all I got for you guys.
All right.
That one just gives me a sense for what you're hoping for and what kind of stuff you'll be thinking about in the future, which is good to know.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Derek.
Okay.
I will be in touch with you within the next few days to let you know the outcome of the interviews.
Okay, great.
And we thank you very much for coming out here again and taking the time to be with us and meet with us.
Thank you too. I enjoy these sorts of interviews. Could talk about libraries all day.
Okay.
Thanks.
Do you know your way out?
Yes, I do. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
you're welcome. And we will take a brief recess. Our next interview is not until 5, so we will reconvene at that time.